Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Such a joy to be here this evening to talk about such an important topic, education freedom in America. What a day that we are in today. And Kellyanne, it's so good to have you here. We're so honored by you to have you in our presence here. And tonight we plan to have a very significant conversation that I think is serious. I think this is the 21st century civil rights issue, education in America. Very serious conversation, but I think we're up for the challenge.
Yes, sir.
Can I start by giving you the nation's report card? In America, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, a congressionally mandated large-scale assessment administered by the National Center for Education Statistics, report in math proficiency in 2022, 35% of white students are proficient in math, while 14% of Hispanic students are proficient in math, and 9% of Black students are proficient in math in America. Reading proficiency, 38% of white students are proficient in reading, 21% of Hispanic students are proficient in reading, and 16% of Black students are proficient in reading. And here's my question for you tonight. Why hasn't this crisis that is in America led the political conversation during the election?
Pastor, first, thank you very much. And to Mr. and Mrs. Yas, thank you. And Jeannie Allen, who I've worked alongside of for decades now. She doesn't look it, but it is true. Maybe I met her in high school. And to all of you, thank you, not just for being here tonight and not just for supporting the great efforts of the Yas Prize scholarships and the Center for Education Reform, but really for standing in the breach, for standing up and showing up and putting up and speaking up on behalf of America's school children who otherwise many times don't have a choice and don't have a voice. That's the most essential piece. It's a great question. It's a timeless question. Why isn't this more part of the central conversation when it comes to elections and campaigns? But I would say this year, we had a continuation of the parents' rights renaissance that began, unfortunately, during COVID and spilled over into Glenn Youngkin's election as governor of Virginia and continues to this moment. And if I just may reflect on the election results to answer your question, it may not seem that it was about education, but it certainly was when you take a look at the racial realignment, when you take a look at President Trump getting more young voters by 10% more young voters than he did before. The argument being, let's get rid of one 82-year-old guy and leave the 78-year-old guy to campaign against the barely 60-year-old woman. That didn't matter to young people. They're saying, excuse me, the system is broken. And you're shoving everybody into college. You're making plumbers and pipe fitters pay for student loans of doctors and lawyers. You're telling us all we must go to a four-year college. We graduate with debt and maybe a degree that we can't use, jobs we can't find, and yet you don't go back to basics, making sure there's a foundation there earlier on in our lives. A lot of those young people were supposed to be persuaded by making history or abortion or even just inflation and immigration, all of which were important to many voters, Pastor. But they also are wondering, when do I get on with the natural accoutrements of an adult life? When can I afford to buy my first home? When can I get out of regular debt, student debt? When will I feel secure enough to invite more people onto my household payroll, meaning get married and have children? And 23% of Gen Zers told pollsters about 2 months ago they're not going to have children. And the reasons they gave were everything from a lack of economic wherewithal for them and I think long-term financial security and bankability, but also just the fear that they can't provide education for them, safety, peace over time. So we have to think very long and hard about that. If President Trump received 54% of the Hispanic male vote nationwide, and he had gains in places like Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Milwaukee, Jacksonville, many places, Cleveland, many places that have had robust school choice and charter school programs for decades, I don't think that's just coincidence. I think it's causation. I think folks are seeing that there's a bright line distinction between those who at least believe parents have a right to have a say where their children go to school and what is taught there. And that's the newer part. and what is taught there. They want some dominion and agency over the curriculum, not just the school itself. And so I do think if you look at the results, it may not seem that education was important. Maybe it's more implicit. But folks like you, Pastor, you're being very humble. Many people across this country were working super hard to elevate education as an issue, going back to those parents and grandparents and caregivers, many of color, but from all backgrounds, and say to them, will you help us? Will you help knock on doors? Will you help drive seniors to the polls? Will you help explain to people why voting early is safe and legal and should not be so rare? And I think that this bright line distinction, whenever my Democratic friends ask me how they can help, how we can unify, how we can heal, I've received lots of questions in the last 48 hours about that. This is the first answer I give, no joke. And I'm going to say that because I'm sitting here. I think I'm sitting here because I say that. This is the first answer I give. Please explain to me why we have such a division politically on an issue that should be binding us culturally. If you want to find that old 80-20 issue, I'd say 99 to 1 issue, this is it.
Absolutely.
Educational freedom, opportunity scholarships, school choice, charter schools, just alternatives to the system. And I will just give you a couple of statistics also. Loudoun County, Virginia, which was the heart and soul, really ground zero for the parents' rights movement, a year after, 1 or 2 years after COVID, and 1 year after Governor Youngkin was elected, in large part because of education, and Terry McAuliffe very brazenly saying he'll make sure parents don't have the say, the opposite of school choice. The year after that, now you see Loudoun County, the numbers have changed dramatically. And that can't just be economy, it can't just be border security, it can't just be wars abroad and crime in their communities. It has to be education, because it's why so many of them live in a beautiful county like Loudoun County. They're told the schools are fantastic and that you can send your kids to public schools. But for the people who were told, I think this is, I say something about this election that affects our issue very, I think, deeply and broadly. This is the election where Americans stood up all across this country and said, excuse me, you're no longer going to tell me who I am, how to think, for whom to vote, and and what I believe, and where I should live, based on my race, my gender, my age, my zip code, my socioeconomic status. The significant realignment, the fact that every single state went more conservatively, except for Delaware and Nebraska, all of the geographic and demographic breadth. So I'm not here to talk about politics, I'm here to talk about the culture. But the culture was reflected in our politics. And I say to my friends across the aisle, routinely, I want to share it here tonight. When they ask, you know, how can we help? What can we agree on? Bipartisanship, unity, healing. I hear a lot more of that the last 40 hours. And my answer is always the same. It's been the same since I was doing press conferences with Floyd Flake, a former congressman from New York City and a black pastor, and Joe Lieberman, God rest his soul, at the time, still a Democrat, senator from Connecticut, before Al Gore tapped him, probably doing the press conference with Jeannie Allen, frankly. We were at the swamp outside the Capitol, that's what it's called, talking about school choice, talking about opportunity scholarships in DC. I don't begrudge the Obamas and the Clintons sending their 3 daughters to Sidwell Friends, a very fine private school here. What I don't understand is how then they can turn around and veto opportunity scholarships that would clearly provide more of an opportunity for kids who aren't as privileged as theirs or mine. And yes, and so...
I think that's where...
Yes.
And to speak to that, that's where I am privileged to have the ability to speak on this stage to you and to have this interview, because I get a chance to bring the perspective from the village that I represent as a pastor for people who are not into politics, people who engage politics once every 4 years, that the politics don't really mean much to them, but the policies that govern them, they do. And so when I think about the single woman, y'all here? Here we go. When I think about the single woman in my community who has 4 children, the oldest child is doing fine in the public school, the middle child have an affinity for aviation and she would love another option for her middle child, and then the 2 younger ones are on the spectrum on the spectrum and have special needs, differently abled children. And now she's looking at the presidency. She doesn't know what to think from what's coming next from the president. She's received all of this messaging from her social media, and she may have some trepidations now. How does the president, what should we expect from the president as we move forward as it relates to education, pioneering an educational revolution, I think, in America? Can we expect that from the president? What does that look like now? What should we expect? And how can we come alongside our president and help make sure that we have education freedom in America?
Both questions equally important. I'll answer them in order. First, I think if past is prologue, you can expect from President Trump and Vice President Vance, who did not go from Middletown, Ohio to Yale Law School necessarily on school choice scholarships, but as I've discussed with him early on after he was selected, is such a living, breathing example of why we need to protect and progress and prosper that for next generation, so the next kids from Middletown, Ohio can get to Yale Law School or whatever it is they want to go to, Welder School for that matter, but with school choice opportunities. This president, I noticed beginning sometime this summer, started as a candidate, started putting in I think the packaging, whether you got an email, and I know you got many, or text messages, or just what was on the website, school choice made the list up there with all the things he talks about, like border security and extending the Tax Cut and Jobs Act and deregulation and ending foreign wars. Everything that he talked about, there was school choice right there. I will tell you, he is 100% in favor of educational freedom and opportunity scholarships and school choice in charter schools. When he got to Washington, it became a little bit more difficult to naturally articulate that as part of the daily presidential conversation, if you will, because he would say, well, aren't we the ones who say it's local, state certainly, but local and really parental? Why would the President of the United States Bigfoot all of that? It's a fair question. The easy answer is easier than making the policy. The easy answer is you want to use the office of the presidency to raise your voice and visibility and bear hug and surround sound these great initiatives and efforts. And I will say, just off the top of my head, the first joint session of Congress in 2017, then later called State of the Union addresses, at least twice we had in the First Lady's box, direct recipients, a direct recipient of school choice and charter school, I can use that, thank you, opportunities. Thank you. It was Denisha Merriweather from Florida. And I don't remember her story specifically. You're welcome to look it up. But Denisha is somebody who had failed the 3rd or 4th grade a couple of times, got rescued by going to another school through these great alternatives, and then basically just testified to her, allowed us all to witness her own story, which is that she ended up getting her master's degree and credits those opportunities. I think they started probably under Governor Jeb Bush, a great education champion in Florida, and that's just continued, and Florida remains one of the best states for this.
Can I ask you a question about that? So, like the example you just named, right? She was rescued by another school, and so what does it look like for schools, for education providers, education innovators? This room tonight is filled with people who are innovative and edgy and have great ideas about education. Is there room to advocate nationally, maybe by showing what your education is like at your school, at your respective institution? Is there a way to advocate nationally for more opportunities like that? That testimony of her situation should not be a one-off. It should be the normal. He's not doing good at one school. There's another school that's better fitted for that child. But how do we leverage our voice, I guess, not only statewide, but nationwide, to ensure that we can get these type of liberties in America?
Well, Denisha Merriweather and Janiyah Davis, who sat there with her mother at I would say the 2020 State of the Union, perhaps, she was one of 50,000 students in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on the wait list. And Governor Tom Wolf had vetoed these programs several times. And we invited them as an example of somebody who would benefit the way Denisha and so many others have if, again, politics were put aside. I think you come and you show the solutions, not just the problems. And this is like my message to Washington. People come to Washington about everything, but definitely when it comes to education, because it's just so easy to absorb those mind-numbing statistics about literacy rates and reading, writing, arithmetic rates, and the graduation rates. And we all see 0 kids in a school in Baltimore, 0 kids at a school in Chicago have. It's so sad, but nobody ever finishes the sentence. How does that statistic go away in the next 5 to 10 years?
Exactly.
So I would say, Pastor, bring those great examples right to the White House, right to Capitol Hill. And I know people do, and I know they do it often enough in the state capitals. I would, and I'd be happy to help, get them here to say, we're going to show you what works in our state. We're going to give you 3 examples of people. I love what Mrs. Yas was saying about, well, you know, once in a while you hear that an athlete got a scholarship, and that's wonderful. But what about everyone else? And I think to make this more universal, look, I'm very bullish and very hopeful, even ahead of the election results, that IIE, Invest in Education, has made it farther than any such educational freedom bill really in modern history. So I'm very happy, 170 or so co-sponsors in the House and many in the Senate. And so even, I think they're even gonna look at that in lame duck, perhaps, and keep going. You know, it's passed a key committee. We need to do that, but bring the examples, the solutions,
Yes.
the bright lights, the best practices. And I just want to say this. As of 2 weeks ago, I had 4 teenagers. I now have 2 20-year-olds and 2 girls in school here at an all-girls Catholic school, 9th and 11th grades. And and going through the college process, I say to all my friends, how did this happen? When did we become these people who we tell our children from the moment they're born, you're so unique, you're your own person, you're an individual, you can make your own choices, you can make your own mistakes, we love you, we support you. Everything that we tell our children, and everything we tell other people's children. And then for some odd, unknown reason, we make them all do the same thing at the same time. Take the SAT, take the ACT, you must apply to 50 schools, apply early to citizen. It's like we're just making them a little robotic. But we missed the beginning. Why at the beginning did we not front load them with an unbelievable education, meaning all kids? We're telling those kids you're unique, and by the age of 5 or 6, they're just a number. And it's a one-size-fits-all system. So I even think backing up a little, and I will say I am 100% pro-life. I understand why people are pro-choice, including my own daughters and my mother. God rest her soul. I am for the Second Amendment. I understand why when there's a school shooting, people say do something, do something. I will never, ever, I can't understand, acknowledge, abide, and accept what feels like an entire political party in this town against letting kids of all backgrounds out of that schoolhouse, break out of that schoolhouse door, make it an exit, and let the dollars follow them to a school that is affordable and quality worthy of each of their humanity and dignity. And that's what this is really about. So I'm very happy. President Trump, I know this time he's going to have people around him. He did last time, but people around him who are natural advocates for this. He needs to also hear from our governors and our state legislatures how successful ESA programs have been, or school choice programs have been, or charter school programs have been. He needs to hear the metrics and find out what he as president can do.
So you would tell advocates for education freedom, educational providers, to not only identify what's wrong, but to also shine light on what's going right.
Absolutely.
But not only, I guess, at the White House, but also, would you suggest also state representatives, your senator, your governor, that you're going to all of those and advocating as well, or just the presidency?
No, all of the above, definitely all of the above. And sometimes people take it right to Washington without really reflecting on what's going on locally and in the states. And then the opposite also happens, which is, well, this is a state issue, it's a parent's issue, why would we take it to the White House? I believe it's all of the above. And we have a mandate now to do great things for people who I believe voted for freedom. And the last thing I'll say is, because, look, I was at the White House every day during COVID, and I know lots of people were home with their kids and their spouses complaining about that. I had no such fortune, but we were there trying to get it right. And if you asked President Trump to reflect on 5 or 6 positive things of that time, I know he would talk about his and Secretary Mnuchin at Treasury and the Congress's ability to change a couple words here or there and make sure that independent schools and religious schools were on parity with what the public schools were getting from the federal government in terms of relief. But he also got to hear from so many of the archbishops, for example, the pastors, the priests, the obviously people running schools of other religious backgrounds. He got to hear from them that they were struggling and they weren't sure they were going to make it, and here's why. And it just showed the tentacles of what happened during COVID. Why do I say this? I think a lot of good has come out of that awful time, meaning parents are very attuned to what's happening in the schools, and there's been so much focus in the last couple of years on the curriculum, on the wokeness, on what are you doing, you're not educating my child, you're indoctrinating your child. That's a very important, sustained conversation, Pastor. But let's not leap over the first essential point. The first building block is, where does the child go to school? Mm-hmm. Where he or she is learning this in the first place. And I think we can do both pillars. You have a right, you should have a say in where your child goes to school and what is taught there. But I look at Tuesday night also not just as an election about the economy, it was an election about the border, it was the election about not being told who you are and how to vote, it was. But I look at it, the two pillars that don't get enough attention, I think, are weakness. So people want strength over weakness, but wokeness, and I would say that. This was the first presidential election after Glenn Youngkin's gubernatorial election, and after you see so many people running for school board, and you see so many great initiatives and measures being passed, becoming law, and making a difference in our states and local communities, and you see the grievous need, particularly in our inner cities, where, frankly, President Trump and the Republicans did much better than they have in the past. Again, for many reasons, but this has got to be a part of it, I'm absolutely convinced. And I say this because the wokeness, people are just saying, I want fairness over wokeness. I said earlier it's not fair to have, welders and carpenters pay for student loans of doctors and lawyers, but people also say they don't want men and women's sports. They're talking about that in the schools. It's not fair to see people come here and sit in the classroom in a Brooklyn or a New York City pupil seat. Somebody just got here whose parents are getting cash and cell phones and clothing and hotel rooms. People say that's not fair, but the biggest, essential, most easy to understand piece of fairness to the American people is what we're talking about here tonight. It's just not fair. It's not fair to these kids to have this kind of money to swear that we're for the kids. So again, just metrics here from 2 days ago. Over $500 million, over $570 million spent on abortion ads from the pro-choice side, 37 million or so from the pro-life side. Why do I say this? Well, we just spent $500 million, everybody, telling women they have a right to choose. What kind of capital are we spending? Human, political, financial capital, making sure that those moms and grandmoms and dads and caregivers know that they have a right to choose.
I think that's very significant, right? That's a very significant conversation that I think many people will. What I love about America is that we can agree to disagree. There are many different opinions about this. But here's what I'd like to ask as we finalize our time together. The education provider, the parent, those who are everyday people who want to advocate for education freedom in America, could you give us maybe what to say and what not to say as it relates to speaking up for education freedom in America? Like, what are some of the do's and don'ts as we try to leverage our voice to acquire the freedoms requisite to have the type of educational opportunities we want in America? Can you give us some advice on how to do that?
Yes, I can do it very humbly because you'll need to customize that for however you feel most comfortable. Lead with solutions, not problems. The problems can be the second part of the sentence or maybe the second paragraph of the presentation. But if you lead with solutions, if you have a roadmap, and within those solutions, you're going to have number 2, best practices, things that are actually working. And then physical, actual reminders of what has succeeded and who has succeeded because of these programs. This is not going to happen by coincidence. It happens through causation. So the following things occurred in a school district or in a state, in a community, in a municipality, and 1,000 flowers bloomed. And this is, and here are the people who have benefited from this. And we want to make sure that this continues. Was it public? Was it private? Was it a joint partnership between the two? How did this happen? Also, The third thing I would say about it is, don't be so shy. I know lots of the centimillionaire and billionaire funders of scholarships really like to be anonymous or really like to be in the background because that's why they're doing it. They don't want the spotlight. I would ask you to put a spotlight on yourself just to tell the story.
Absolutely.
You don't need to be all over the mainstream media. I understand that. But just to tell the story. And this is the thing. I think that the education is sort of the crisis next door. So make sure that we have stories from people who say, I got lucky in the lottery and got into the charter school, and here's what happens, so that people understand. And also, I think we have to elevate the actual stories for another reason, which is, I think asks 1 through 3 should not be about money, so that we're focused on the student, we're focused on the mission set here, which is to make sure more children, and then just say, we're all for choice, we're all for freedom, but can we talk for those, can we vote for those who can't vote at all? Our young people, they've got more of the future than any of us, and we have to invest in them through education. I think that both Jeannie and Mrs. Yas said it perfectly, which is, if the foundation is not there, the rest doesn't happen. So I think a very positive, uplifting, optimistic. If we run in there and we talk about these depressing statistics and we go right at attacking the teachers' unions, fun to do, especially this week, but it doesn't educate another child. And I have to say, I think this goes beyond the teachers' unions at this point. I truly do. That can't be the only reason that you have so many otherwise reasonable legislators who are also parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles who are standing in the schoolhouse door preventing kids of all backgrounds from exiting the failing school. It has to be beyond that. I think there's just this, they almost look at this as this is a partisan issue and my party's not for it. That has to just melt away. We can't wait for a global pandemic for people to feel aligned and collaborative on this. And that's what I would do. And then the other thing I would do is find a couple of people who otherwise do not agree with you, do not vote with you, do not care for your politics at all, and bring them aboard here. I think that's incredibly important. This is an issue that has natural, what I call tripartisan support. Majorities of Republicans, Democrats, and independents support it when they are given the facts, when they are given the figures. So we should represent that way as well.
Absolutely. I think wholeheartedly, we appreciate you for being here, for talking to this robust audience of people who are very passionate about school choice, education, freedom in America. I think ultimately, for us as Americans, we really have to put our hope and our faith and our future in our hands and build a world that we want to see together. We shouldn't look to anyone to build the world for us. We have to work collaboratively and intentionally to build this work together, to do this work together. And I think if we do that and we protect the we community, the us community, and stay together, we should be the United States of America, not the divided states of America, but the United States. I think if we do that, we have a chance to change the trajectory of our future. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. Thank you.